Hello and welcome. So today we are talking all about Decred 2.0, which is an absolutely massive release. So excited about this one. We're joined with Dave, and hopefully Jake will be with us shortly. But we're going to cover what went into this release. We're going to look at some of the important changes and just see where Decred goes forward from here. Which honestly, this stuff is absolutely so exciting to me, and I can't wait to kind of delve into it and just see how these guys the thoughts behind this and see what they think. So how are we, fellas? How are you, Dave? How are you, Exitus?
All doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. Glad to be here.
Doing good. Looking forward to some Q&A.
Great stuff. It's always a pleasure to have these guys on, because it's not until we have Dave on, Jake, and any of the others like Buck, that we can actually delve into the more nitty gritty. So it's nice. And I've got some basic questions here, but if you want to go deeper onto it and elaborate further, I mean, that would be absolutely amazing. So let's just start with the high network throughput point that we put here. So in this release, Decred has increased its throughput improvements in several key areas. So can you explain what this achieves? What are the benefits?
Sure. I'll start with the high level, and then I can give a few more details. So the basic principle of it, though, is whenever any of the transactions or the network, you have the nodes that are out on the network are communicating with each other, they have to look up a whole bunch of data. There's a lot of things that have to happen. Whenever you have transactions, for example, you have signatures that have to be verified. There's a whole sequence of events that needs to happen. So the general principle of it is that whenever a transaction, I think most people are probably somewhat aware, but whenever a transaction goes out to the network, you verify it before you send it on to the next person. And so that process, same thing with blocks. So basically all of the information, it gets sent out to the network, node by node, if you will, and it goes out to multiple at a time, and then they verify it, and then it spreads out from there. So the basic premise there, what we did this time to help speed things up, is instead of currently, or the way it was before this release, you'd basically have to wait for all of that processing to take place before it would send the next bit of information. So if you have spaced out, just to take a transaction, for example, but it applies to blocks and all the data really. But the way that it worked before is, so one node would send the transaction or the data to the other node, and then it would do all that verification, and it would wait before it would send the next one until it gets verification that everything is good, and then it would send it on. So the major difference that we did it now is we parallelized everything, so that while one is doing the verification or looking up the data in the database, it can take quite a long time. You also have latency. If I'm sending, for example, a transaction from in one country all the way across the world to another country, there's quite a bit of latency involved in that. So essentially, we just made it where it all happens at the same time. So while it's looking up blocks from the database or looking up transaction unspent outputs that it needs all the information, then it automatically starts queuing up the next one. And so it causes the throughput, basically depending on how many transactions are happening at a time, but it can be quite a significant difference. So just to give a little bit of a number to help make sense of, if you're talking to another node over, say, if you're in the States or in England, and you're talking to a node in China, sometimes the latency can be 300 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds. And so if you're trying to send something, trying to relay, say, 10 transactions around that, you're talking about 3 seconds of latency in between if you were to add them up serially every single time, right? So if you send a transaction, you wait for the latency to happen, you get your acknowledgement, and actually it's twice, because you have the send, and then you have the acknowledgement. So, but I'll just keep it simple. And so then, if you've got that 300 milliseconds, then you wait for the next one and the next one, you can add up to 3 seconds. Whereas if you're kind of doing everything all at the same time, you can pretty much get that all done in the course of maybe only 3 of those latency waiting periods, as opposed to all 10 of them. So you might cut it down from, say, the 3 seconds to only less than a second. And that's just for transactions, but the same applies to all of the data. So once you start adding all that up, you really start to see everything flows through the network much more quickly.
I mean, that's absolutely amazing. I love that. And clearly, I mean, I've been doing a little bit of study on Golang, and that's one of their big things with the concurrency, where they can literally just, rather than having to wait for one to go through, they can literally move on to the next one in sequence. So yeah, absolutely amazing. And a similar thing here for our lightweight clients, where they're now synchronizing like 50% faster, which I thought was absolutely impressive. Last time I had to sync the Bison Relay wallet from nothing, it took me about 20 minutes. So presumably now that's like a 10-minute sync from not having anything all the way to working. How is that along the same lines as what you just said?
Similar. There's some more actually optimizations in there. The last time I checked it, you were saying about 20 minutes. I think after all, as of this release, the last time I checked it, it was roughly about 6 or 7 minutes now, down from that. So it made quite a big difference. So it's similar. That the change that I just discussed actually does help with that quite a bit too, because as I mentioned, it's all data. So one of the things that you're doing when you're first coming on with any kind of a lightweight wallet, whether that's SPV mode and DCR wallet, or Bison Relay that's SPV, and even the new Bison wallet that the decentralized exchange is working on, they deal with a lot of the same type of scenario because it's also a lightweight wallet. But so the first process, there's two main things that have to happen whenever you are coming online with a lightweight wallet. Number one is you have to download all the headers, and then number two, you download all the filters, which tells you which transactions are relevant to you, so that you can go get those transactions to update your balance in your wallet. So there's the latency aspect there. That's a big part of it too. It's because the way that the header download works is, for example, is you get them in batches. So because they're all, I guess I'll describe it a little bit. I think most people are aware of this point, how it works, but the basic premise is the whole blockchain is built off the series of headers, and every header links to the previous one. So you have this entire chain of headers. And so when you go to download them, you get, say, 2,000 headers, and then you get the next 2,000 headers, and so on. And so every single time that you get one of those batches of headers, you have that latency period that I was talking about. And so depending on how much latency you have in between each one of those requests, you can just imagine that if we're around, 800 something thousand blocks. So if you divide that by 2,000 and then multiply that by that latency, that would be a guaranteed amount of time that it would take no matter what. And so by the previous point that I was just talking about, by cutting out the latency and allowing things to happen in parallel like that, you can cut off all of that time frame just right out of the gate. So that's one part of it. But the other big part of it was that it was far worse than that for the filter aspect. So the headers were already in batches, but the filters were being fetched one at a time, essentially. So you would incur that latency penalty every single filter. And so if you had a long period, if you're talking to a node, for example, or if you're, depending on what the latency is between you and some node all the way across the world, that could add up a lot. And so now we basically applied batching to it. So you go and you get a whole bunch of filters at once, and then that cuts down on the number of requests that you actually have to make. And by doing that, you significantly cut down the latency. And then you add in the parallel aspect that I just talked about, doing everything at the same time. And that's kind of the big difference. It dropped it down significantly.
I'm glad you touched on that, actually, because I hadn't realized that the filters weren't downloaded in batches. I thought they just naturally they were. So that's interesting to know that that's happening as well. Just the speed improvements alone is absolutely amazing. Now, I had it down at being able to do the SPV wallet full sync in 10 minutes, but 6 minutes is blindingly quick, Do you have anything to add on to that, Exitus? Any thoughts on that?
Well, as far as speed goes, even DCRD, the full node, downloads and syncs incredibly fast. Even, in the video I did, even on a really cheap VPS, I was shocked how quick it was. And I guess I would ask, are there plans to, is it possible to prune DCRD to make it even smaller in the future? Because right now it's 12 gigabytes, which is still very small for a blockchain that's been out for 8 years. But is there a possibility and a plan to prune it at some point to make it even smaller?
Yeah, for sure. That's actually one of the big design decisions that we started off from the very beginning, to make sure that is possible. A lot of projects out there that don't worry about it so much, they have some fatal flaws in their design that won't allow them to prune. In our case, we absolutely can. Everything when you look at the way that the transactions work, and I can even describe the general process real quick on how that would work, is that every single transaction references other transactions, other coins that it's spending. And so part of that is it's called the unspent transaction output set, or the UTXO set for short. And so one of the big things that it is designed is that the only true information you need to be able to completely validate that everything that is coming in, all the new transactions are proper, they aren't double spending, everything is valid, is that UTXO set. And that UTXO set is roughly about 1.2 gig right now. So that's all we really need. The rest of it is historical block data that can be completely pruned. So, you know, that 12 gigabytes can be cut down to about 1.2. The challenging part of it, if you will, or the reason that we don't currently prune is simply that you definitely need to have some archival nodes out there, because if you want somebody to be able to basically validate the entire chain from the beginning, you have to be able to get that data from somewhere. And so you don't want to completely lose all the history forever. So the general idea would be to have two different modes, so to speak. So you have like an archival node that keeps all the blocks as it currently works today, and then you'd have the other, the pruned mode. And so that would start essentially from a snapshot of the UTXO set as of some point in time, and then just download all of that. And I can go in some more further details if you want on that, but the basic principle is that you would start with basically only that UTXO set, and then you have everything you need to be able to validate. And so you would never need to download all the original blocks and all that data. And you could even start from some point in the future at any given arbitrary point too, with some other changes, which we could talk about if you want, but that's pretty technical.
Yeah.
Short answer is yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, great. I mean, actually, this keeps coming up about the pruning thing, as I've been doing quite a few scaling videos lately, and just that's like the next stage as you get to your 1 terabytes or 20 terabytes, you know, and you have to prune, making sure that you are flexible enough that can happen. It's going to be massively important, and only Decred are years away from that, which is absolutely fortunate. But the fact that you guys are already thinking about it as you're thinking about pretty much everything else that nobody else is thinking about, it's brilliant. I love it, absolutely love it. Just the final one on the speed aspect of Decred 2, and already we can see that, you know, it's monumental, that the speed is just massive. But it says here about the improved initial peer discovery. So as far as I'm concerned, whenever I'm running DCR decks or Decrediton, the peer discovery is pretty much instant. I can normally get between 6 and 8 almost instantly. So it's really interesting to see that this is an area that we're already probably leaps and bounds of most people in, that this has already been improved. So I wonder if you can just kind of delve into that a little bit for us, and tell us kind of why this was important to follow, and kind of the benefits here.
Sure. Mainly the primary benefit of this one is aimed at people that are very first coming onto the network. Once you've already been on the network before, the big part of I explain a little bit how it works behind the scenes, so it'll make more sense, is that basically every node that you've seen whenever you're on the network, when you very first come up, you don't know about anybody, right? It's called the bootstrapping process. So when you very first come out, you've never run the software before, whether it's like you mentioned, the Dex wallet, or it's DCRD, or it's DCR wallet in SPV mode, any of them. Whenever you first come on, they don't know about any of the nodes out there on the network, so they have to discover. They have to go through a discovery process. Now, once you've already been through that process, you keep them, most of them anyway, you maintain a database of all the addresses that you've seen. And so from that point forward, it's always much quicker, because you can essentially just go and look up in your local database of peers that you've seen before that you know are good, and then you connect out to them. And so whenever I don't know if you've run things from the beginning in quite some time, but one of the things that you can probably notice if you were to go, and well, not now, but if you go back to the old one and try it, you would see that once you've already been through the process and you restart it, what you mentioned, you get the nodes very quickly. You come back up. But when you're very first coming on for the first time and you didn't have any of that information, that process took a little bit longer, and it could take, sometimes upwards of a few minutes before it found enough peers and the proper, before you stabilized it, the number of peers, the target number of peers, which is typically 8. So basically that's what we worked on, is that for the very first initial experience when you come on, to speed that up, to be able to find the peers much more quickly. It isn't, I mean, in part of it, obviously it's a better experience. If you're first coming on, you've already got better connectivity. But another reason is that if you kind of, I was being a little bit vague in the notes simply because it gets pretty technical, but the idea is that, as I mentioned before, you have a database of the nodes that you've discovered. And so part of that process is that whenever you connect the nodes, you find out about other nodes. They tell you about, hey, here are all the nodes that I know about, and then those get added to your local address book. And then from there, you periodically go out and you connect to some of the other ones and you ask them who they know about. And so that's kind of how that all spreads throughout the network, and everybody discovers everybody else, that you could maintain a fairly updated set of the available nodes out on the network. But one of the things that part of the initial bring up phase is that, as I mentioned, that process works fine, and it's very nice for over time. It helps you maintain the set of known peers. But if you kind of extrapolate that a little bit, when you're very first coming on, you don't know about anything. It takes a while for that to happen, and so there's a bit of a potential danger that you could have. This is totally, just when you really start thinking about, like, what are the most malicious ways that you could possibly think about trying to attack people, is like, if you very first come on the network and it takes you a while to find out about a whole bunch of other nodes, you do suffer like a slight risk. I mean, I'm very, very minor, but you're talking about the risk where you could kind of be partitioned from the network when you were very first coming on to find out about nodes. And maybe that terminology may not be clear, but the idea is that if you have a whole bunch of, let's say you had a whole bunch of of attackers that are trying to single out a single person who's just very first coming on to the network for the first time, well, they could like intentionally not tell them about the rest of the network. If it just so happened that one of the first ones that you found out about was one of their the malicious nodes, well, then they may not tell you about the rest of the network. And if they don't tell you about the rest of the network, they can kind of keep you isolated. And so a big reason that we were working on the initial peer discovery is that we're preventing that possibility at all. And it also, like I said, it speeds up the initial process a lot too, which is better for the user experience. But it's also just to kind of be super paranoid, if you want to say that way, to make us even more secure against any kind of potential shenanigans that people could play around that.
I love how forward thinking you guys are. The fact that you're thinking about stuff that I hadn't even considered an issue is absolutely brilliant, which is going to bring us on to the next one, that the big part of the Decred 2 release. But before we hit the big news and before we go diving into this, I have sent Jake out a couple of messages, so I'm not sure if he's struggling to get in or not. So I don't know if Exus, you wouldn't mind just kind of contacting him with the stream link or something, just make sure he's okay.
Where did you message him?
I did it both on Element and Bison Relay. It might just be that I don't think he's got the time wrong, because he messaged me a few minutes beforehand. But this is the next big bit. So before we go on to that, just the speed improvements, absolutely amazing. Is there anything else that we should kind of delve into before we look at the main feature?
No, I think we can move on.
We're okay. So I'm hyping this up a little bit. Quite excited about this. Now, as you may or may not have noticed, if you've been reading crypto news, you would have seen things like a lot of privacy elements being shut down, and a massive proponent of that is that they go after the centralized company that are running these services. Now, as you may have noticed, that Decred's privacy, the stake shuffle mixing, was always done through a centralized messaging server. So it'd send out the messages and you could mix your coins. Well, that's now gone. In Decred 2, we no longer have a centralized mixing server. This is all done in DCRD, which is the daemon that runs all the full nodes. So I'm going to just let Dave take this away. Really, what are the big benefits? What are you most excited about? This is a monumental part of the release. Take it away.
Yeah. So yeah, this is definitely probably the biggest thing I'm excited about this release. Is it's as you mentioned, it's something that's actually a pretty massive leap forward in terms of the ability to mix without having all kinds of potential issues that come from that. So one of the main ones, of course, is that you're going to get much higher reliability, in the sense that since you no longer have to worry about having servers separate servers that are out there running it, as long as you're on the network, you're going to be able to mix, because all of the nodes out there, and it actually uses the exact same mechanism as when you're sending transactions or you're sending blocks, or all the way that the network syncs itself. It's the exact same principle here, where all the mixing takes place over that exact same network. So what you can notice that for people that have maybe some governments that like, say, for example, the Great Firewall of China, things like that, that make it difficult for people to speak to other servers out on the network, you won't have any of that issue anymore, because as long as you're connected to the Decred network, all the information is flowing through the exact same channel. So you don't have a lot of the issues around that. And of course, the other big thing is the robustness of it, in the sense that there's not any kind of central point of failure or multiple central points of failure. Even if you have multiple servers set up, you could still, anytime you have a server, as we've seen recently in the news, anytime you have a centralized server, then that server can potentially be taken down. It's ripe for abuse and all kinds of issues, or they could go after it, take it down. You can even control it at the ISP level, where things can be blocked. And so by putting it out on the network, that you significantly increase the reliability. And the other thing that you'll pretty much notice about it, that I think that is a huge leap forward in terms of this, is that the way that it works, and I'll kind of go over the process here, is that, but it makes it where because it's quantum secure and everything, the amount of messages, this is kind of like, I think what's so nice about it, is that previously you could the server couldn't see at all whose coins in the end, after the mix happens, which coins belong to who, right? So it was all blinded from the server too, which was already quite a bit better than most of the other methods that I've seen out there. A lot of the way that, if you look into the way that most of the other projects work, is they have a centralized server, and all of the people who want to participate just straight send them the information that they want to mix, for example, the coins that they want to create into the finalized transaction. And then the server knows all that information, and then it creates the actual final transaction. And after the fact, nobody else on the network knows who belongs, or which coins belong with which person, but the server does. So in our case, we've designed it in the sense where even the server didn't know that. But what the server would know is that the people who are connected to it, right? So you don't know which coins belong to which people, but you could know that, well, these particular IPs or these particular computers were involved in it, as opposed to, you don't know which one is which, but you at least could make some form of a graph, so to speak, to say that, well, but I do know that at least, these people or these computers were communicating with these computers. And then maybe over time, if you wanted to try and spend some time looking into that, you could perhaps do a little bit of correlation. It doesn't tell you too much, but again, a little bit. But now, because the way the decentralized mixing works, and on the network, you can't even do that, because you don't know. It's actually it uses something that's known as the Dining Cryptographers Protocol, which is essentially just a secure multi-party broadcast. And it's quite cool technology. It's quite old, but it really hasn't been employed very many places, because it can be extremely inefficient. And so a big part of the work was making it where it's efficient enough that it can run at wide scale without bringing everything to its knees. To use a little bit of technical jargon, one of the big issues with Dining Cryptographers networks in general, or these secure multi-party broadcasts, is that they tend to have very, very poor scaling. Usually it's depending on the protocol, could even be what we call n cubed, or meaning that essentially, like, for every participant, you have to cube it. And as the number of participants grows, as you can imagine, a cubed value grows very quickly. So we've actually got it down to linear, linear time, which means, that's linear in the number of participants. So that means that you can have a lot of participants, and it still will be snappy. It'll still run quickly without any kind of slowdown in that regard. So that's kind of the major part of it. And in the end, it's you kind of see that it just works, and it doesn't seem necessarily like it is that different, but it really does have a huge amount of benefits, as just described in that regard. And then, so if you want to, I can even go over the process a little bit. Sure. Okay. So the way that it works essentially is that whenever nodes want to participate in a mix, they create an ephemeral identity. So you don't know which. This is what I was talking about before. You don't know which node is even participating anymore. So now with that ephemeral identity, you end up sending out it's called a pair request, and essentially it's I want to participate in a mix and for this number of coins. So let's take the common case that you're going to want to buy a ticket with mixed funds. So there's a certain denomination that you want to mix so that you have enough to be able to buy the ticket. So you send out a pair request and you say, okay, I want to mix 250. That's not the exact number, but I'll keep it easy. So I want to mix 250 coins. And so at the same time, other people that want to participate in the mix are doing the same thing. They're creating their ephemeral identities. They're sending out these pair requests. So then now the network knows that, okay, there's a whole bunch of these pseudonyms out there. We don't know who's who. We don't know what's what, but we do know that there's some people that want to get together and they actually want to mix. And so after that, a session gets formed. It works in epochs. So right now it's set at 10 minutes. That could be tweaked in the future if we want to. But essentially, everybody that shows up and does one of these pair requests during that epoch then gets linked up. And it all happens over the network in a decentralized fashion. And so from there, it moves into the next part of the phase where you start to exchange keys. And this is the point that it can get really technical if I were to go too much in detail. So I'll try to keep it a little bit higher level. But the general principle of it is that everybody who's going to participate individually goes through a process that allows them and only them to communicate with each other in such a way that nobody else can unencrypt the data. So that means that. So if I would just say the three of us, we're gonna mix together. You can kind of think of it this way. So Phoenix and I, then we actually create our own encrypted channel between the two of us. And it does happen. It happens over the network, but it happens in such a way that nobody else can read it. So the two of us are communicating in a way, and you don't know which ones are actually communicating, but nobody on the outside. But the two of us do know that we're doing it. And so then we can do that to exchange some secret information. And then I do the same thing with Exitus, for example. And so now what happens is because there's three of us, and say Phoenix and I share some secrets, and Exitus and I share a different set of secrets. What that allows you to do is then you could take all that and that information, then you can move on to the next part of the process, which is it's called basically slot reservation. And like I said, this gets super technical, but the general principle of that is that because you don't want anybody to be able to identify who it is that's actually communicating with the other ones, you basically have a whole bunch of potential slots that different messages can go into, and then whenever we're communicating with each other via we've created our secrets that allows us to know basically where we're going to put our information and which slot we're going to put our information, and only the people who have that shared secret know which slot is their own slot in between each individual party, right? So you and I know which shared slot we have. Exodus and I know which shared slot we have, and then you and Exodus also know which shared slot that you guys have, and it's all happening at the same time in parallel. And so then now that allows you to set up the secure multi-party broadcast that I was talking about before. So then it all happens, and it's a bunch of clever math, but the general principle of it that happens is that once all of the information gets sent out, everybody sort of you can almost think of it like a matrix in a certain sense, where all of the people send all that information that they've individually agreed upon and created an equation. They created some math or some additional secrets, shall we say, that then get sent out. And so now what happens is everybody kind of sums everything horizontally that they got from individually, pairwise from each one. And then all of those get sent out, though that the entire pairwise solutions get sent out. And then it kind of gets summed vertically, if you can kind of think of it. I mean, that isn't really what's going on, but to help kind of visualize it, that's the idea, is you're essentially calculating the same information two different ways using two different pieces of information, and nobody has all that information. So as a result, nobody can tell who's communicating with who and what is actually being sent and which one belongs to which. And you know that it's proper or not because the two different sums, the two different ways that you're calculating the same information have to match. And if they don't match, then this is kind of where the part of the real challenging part of making all this work. Everything I described to this point is kind of the quote easy part, in the sense that that's the positive path. And when you're part of the challenge of programming, often, in these systems, is that making things work, just getting them to work, is typically speaking the easy part. It's not all that difficult. The hard part is when you start to think about, okay, well, what are all the ways that you could attack it? What if you have somebody who's being malicious? What if they don't want to participate, or they start to participate and then they disappear, and all this kind of stuff. And so there's a whole bunch of other things that happen alongside that. And you can see if you were to look at the release notes, we kind of talk about the different types of messages that we have, and you can see some of the other messages. But those are all about what we refer to as blame assignment. And the idea is that, so if you go through this entire process and everybody adds everything up one way and they added up everything another way, and things don't match up, well, we know that somebody didn't do something correctly. And so now you start to go through a whole other process that goes through and identifying which one of them didn't follow the protocol properly, so that you can evict them and then rerun it again. So you do the same thing. So now you're left with the rest of the people that were that want to mix. So this way you can't stop a mix from happening by intentionally trying to not complete the protocol. And again, this whole process that we were talking about, the blame assignment, it's also done in such a way that you never reveal who it is that was even wrong. Which secrets, if you will, that they originally had, what information they wanted to mix versus the other people, so that it keeps everybody's privacy. But yet you still are able to figure out that, okay, well, this person is the person that was not following the protocol, so we need to remove them and go on to the next mix. And I'm sure that was probably quite technical. I tried to dumb it down a little bit, but it's very, it's quite in depth.
My head wants to explode, but I'm going to go back and watch that over and over and over again, just to kind of process it. So I really appreciate the fact that you have gone into that much depth with it, because it kind of, when I hear it, it kind of does help me go through it. And I love the fact, like I said, there isn't much about what you guys have done in Decred 2 that I haven't just been my mind hasn't gone, oh my God, they just did that. I was trying to explain it to my wife and kids the other day. They're like, what? Why does that matter? But it's huge. And honestly, when people, I don't know whether people are going to realize how great this is, but when it does catch on that Decred has actually done this in a decentralized peer-to-peer way, where every participant in the network can just be sovereign over their own privacy, it's going to blow some minds. And there's no one sat in the middle taking funds or transacting, doing things that we eradicated that whole middleman thing. And in my eyes, as I was saying on the show I did earlier, that's what Decred's all about. It's about the peer-to-peer aspect, the decentralized aspect, unrigging all the rubbish that goes on, so that people can be responsible for every part of their what they're interested in this case, Decred, and the privacy and holding the coins and whatnot. Thank you, Dave. That was absolutely amazing. And I'm so excited about the privacy mixing. And it is available now for anyone in the chat. It's available now in Decrediton. It's also available on the command line wallet. I don't know if it's available on Crypto Power yet, but I'm sure that won't be too far down the line. Have you got anything to add to that, Exus? What are your thoughts?
If I could jump in real quick. I did forget one.
Sorry.
I did forget one thing I think it was kind of important, is that the another big aspect or thing that we did with that is that the actual remember I was talking about the way that the peers communicate. That's all actually done in a quantum secure way too. So we're not even using things that, like, if we have to worry about quantum computers coming out, like you can't even break it with quantum computers. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Exodus. That was kind of an important thing I forgot.
I was just going to ask the general question. So basically, everyone running a Decred version 2 node is assisting in this mixing, from what I understand correctly. Would you say that's correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's kind of if you can kind of think of it the same way that whenever you're on the network, you see transactions from other people, and then you forward those transactions onto the rest of the network, and it kind of spreads out through the network, and that's how everything communicates. It's the same thing, except for now you have these mixed messages. But as I was mentioning, it's all the challenging part of the kind of neat or the novel part of it all is that it's all happening, despite it all happening in public and all these messages that are being relayed all around the network by everybody. Nobody can tell what's going on, right? Because of the whole process that I just explained.
So users would they shouldn't run it behind, say, Tor or something.
You can. It doesn't matter. You can even if you want to have more security as far as so that people don't even know that your IP address is out on the network, for example, you can run it behind Tor. Yeah, you don't need to, but it's possible.
And it would still connect with the non-Tor nodes.
Correct. Yes.
Wow. It's because I was looking at the Decred Mapper website for all the full nodes, and it's not showing the version 2 nodes yet. And I was wondering if that's by design, maybe.
I don't know. I think they're probably maybe the software hadn't been updated.
Okay, that was my assumption too as well.
I'm not sure. I actually haven't looked at the code on that one. I think I know who runs it. I'll go hit them up and see what's that. But I'm not 100% sure.
Jay Holdstock runs it.
Yeah, I thought so.
But one question from Twitter regarding the privacy: is there going to be some sort of blog post kind of explaining all these things as a follow up to the initial privacy blog post from a few years ago?
There might be. I don't really have plans to do it myself because part of the things that at the moment we don't want to kind of poke the bear, so to speak.
Right. Okay.
But I do think that it's probably a worthwhile thing to do and try to explain it in a even more simplified way. I try to keep it fairly simple, but the part of that makes it so nice is that it really is the fact that it's not easy to do. This is why you haven't seen it elsewhere. For example, it's actually quite challenging to get all this stuff to work properly, and to be robust and secure against malicious actors too, right? Just making it work isn't technically in and of itself that difficult, but it's all that blame assignment and making sure that you can't disrupt everything that's going on. But yeah, I think it's worth probably trying to explain it a little bit.
Yeah, it might. I mean, my port of call at the moment is maybe explain it on Bison Relay. Do it as a news post rather than blog, maybe. Just so it's kept private for Decred users. If you want to read about it, you've got to come over to Bison Relay.
That's an idea. Pretty good.
No, I think it is very helpful. But like you say, yeah, there's some stuff going on at the minute that maybe you don't want to poke the bear too much, but the fact that this has come along at such an opportune moment, when everyone else is crying foul play and all the rest of it, and we're just marching on and building this stuff out in a decentralized peer-to-peer way, is just absolutely amazing, astounding.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of to your point a little bit earlier, one of the challenging things to explain to people often when you're talking about like, oh, well, why does it matter? And they're kind of like, oh, it's everybody, or seemingly most of the time whenever I speak to people about these matters, that people usually don't care about if things are decentralized or not until they have to. And that's always the issue, is that, as long as everything's working fine, you can connect out to your centralized server or servers, then it's all fast and snappy. And like everybody's like, oh, why do you want to bother doing those kind of things? Because it's working fine. It seems like there's no problem. And then, it comes along and it gets shut down. And now everything gets turned off. I mean, obviously, I think most people watching this are probably familiar with the news of everything that's getting taken down that has anything to do with privacy here recently. And so that's why it's important in the end, is because while everything is smooth and you don't have any issues and everything is running, sure, like it doesn't seem like it matters all that much. But the whole point is that at any point, whenever you have any kind of a centralized point of failure, that point of failure, that centralized point can be attacked. And then now all of a sudden you're left without the ability to do certain functionality. And so that's why it is really, in my estimation, it is really important to have everything decentralized in the sense that, there's no central point of failure. So yeah, that's really, when you get down to it, I think probably the most important reason for the why is that you don't want to have a centralized point of failure, because if it can be attacked, it will eventually be attacked.
Yeah, we were having a brief discussion before the show, and we were saying, and I'd said this in a few tweets as well, that now everything that was on the 2016 roadmap in terms of things that that the Decred team wanted to build out and make sure there was no centralized point of failure has now been built out. The mixing aspect was kind of the last thing, along with the treasury and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And it's really nice to see that Decred has Decred and its team, sorry, its development team, have kept to those principles. And it's been a long road. You know, we're over 8 years now since the project was released, and every year without fail, one more of those points has been tackled to move the project forward and to make sure that those original goals are seen through. And it's such an opportune moment that Decred 2 is the point that has been achieved. You know, in a video that I did way back in 2019, I said, you know, this will probably take about 10 years. The development cycle does tend to lend itself that way, where, you know, anything that involves a lot of research, a lot of development that hasn't been done before tends to take a long time. So the fact that it's been finished, you know, in my eyes, a couple of years ahead of time, it's really nice to see, and it's nice to see that people are using it, and everything that's been built is being used by a lot of people that are keen on Decred, and it's functioning as intended, which you know, it's kudos to you guys. It's been a massive journey, and you guys have done such a great job, and I can't praise you guys enough, actually, and how grateful I am that it's nice to see a lot of credibility in that respect, that you guys have followed that path and put everything in action in place. Before we move on to the what comes next section, people in the community, if you have or people in the chat, if you have a question for Dave, and hopefully Jake should be along at some point. We've messaged him now, so hopefully he'll come along at some point. But if you have a question, ask away now, and it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts on it, or if I've missed anything that Dave needs to kind of delve into. Now is the perfect time to kind of ask those questions. Make sure we don't miss anything there. Exus, have you got anything that you want to add or ask Dave, or questions?
No, there's a few questions here that I guess the first one is from Tall Americano. He says, basically, what are your thoughts on TS? And you know, so it's been about 2 years since that first block reward change went through that reduced the miners. So I guess that's a pretty good question. What's your thought on TS right now?
Haven't really looked at it too much recently, because one of the things that I noticed is that since the last change that really cut down the mining rewards, the amount of activity on the market, if anybody's kind of been watching it, it did change in shape a bit. It's still happened to a certain degree, but to a much lesser degree. And so I think for the most part at this point, the primary thing is simply that because the project's been so low for so long now, it's kind of it's difficult to get eyes and everything. But I think for the most part, that saga is mostly behind us. If you actually look at like I was mentioning, if you actually look at the way that the indicators and everything that were talked about in the blog post and all like that, you can see that they're still happening, but at a very reduced scale. Meaning that, most likely the most likely reason for that is that the amount of coins that they have left to continue doing it are significantly less than what they were. If you look at the volume and everything involved, for example, the number of spikes, they've grown in intensity, making it ever more difficult. It seems, if you look at it, it looks like it's getting more and more difficult for them to continue to control it. So, I'm pretty positive about the development and everything and how that's going. It's obviously going to continue to take time to continue draining, and just because they've had so many coins. But as far as I can tell, and again, I haven't really watched it probably in the last couple of months, because the indicators things were improving on that front quite a bit. So I kind of stopped watching it so closely. I know there are others who are keeping an eye on it as well.
And do you think the release of Bison Wallet or DCR Dex version 1 is going to have any major impact to kind of finishing off the suppressor?
Well, I think the market making capabilities could have a significant impact for sure, especially if various people get involved in that. The part of what's going on to a certain degree as well is that the bots are kind of mostly controlling everything at this point. And so if you have, and when I say the bots, it's pretty much probably the bots in one major area, and I'll avoid saying specific details. But when you get to, you're talking about the decentralized exchange with the market making capability that's coming out, the bots that are on there. If you have multiple people that are kind of combating against that, yeah, I think that will help significantly as well.
Yeah, great stuff. Now, looking forward to DCR Dex version 1. Should be really good. I was saying to Exodus before the show as well, what a great tutorial he's just put together for using DCR Dex on Umbrel. Well worth having a little look. It looks like that could be the way to go for a lot of us that want to keep our always on markets going, especially when these market maker bots come out. Anything else there, Exodus?
Air Sand Fire says, in the last Ask Me Anything you said regarding development on DCRD, it is basically mostly at this point diminishing returns, and that you'd pivot to the app layer. He asks, would you mind expanding on that if that's still your thinking?
So mostly yes. I think the kind of did decide to spend a little bit more time at the layer due to the advent of the decentralized mixing and everything. I know that we're talking about kind of what I'm sure that's one of the questions that's coming forward, but yes. So there's probably a few more things that we can tackle on that front for the centralized mixing front, basically improving privacy even further in some areas around there. So I think that there's going to be some more work towards that, but for the most part, I mean, that's still, I would say, mostly the case is that, and when I talk about, like upper layers too, you can actually kind of, even though technically this is, it is on the core network, even the decentralized mixing, that is part of what I was referring to to a certain degree when I was talking about that, is that it does run on the core network, but it really isn't the DCRD in and of itself. Because really what's going on there is I was kind of talking about before, is all of the real magic, so to speak, of it is happening between the wallets and all the participants of the people that are mixing. DCRD is really just acting as a dumb relay as far as for all those messages to happen. So, everything that I was just talking about, all that math and everything that's taking place, DCRD does some validation of the information that comes in from all those mixing messages, just to keep to keep the network secure from people being able to put a bunch of junk out there. But aside from that, all the real core logic is really happening up in the wallets. And so when we're talking about at the upper layer, we're talking about building things on top. Really, the decentralized mixing is also, it falls into that category. And so, so for the most part, though, yes, I'm still of the mind that there are some things, but it's mostly diminishing returns as far as the specific details of DCRD itself. When I'm talking about like the actual core network, so to speak. And so. Yeah, I think that answers it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is coming up quite a lot actually about what's coming next, what's going to be built on top of Decred now that pretty much it is feature complete, and everything that kind of is going to be a massive structural difference has pretty much been implemented. And in many respects, I think it could come down to kind of how to do it, and it's something I've been thinking about, building pages and building storefronts on Bison Relay and kind of contributing that way. But is there anything specific that you guys are interested in? My big thing is, and I said this before the show, is the merchant side of things, in getting the storefronts going, getting marketplaces going, and actually getting into the hands of vendors and start using this. But is there anything that's kind of stopping that now, or is there anything that you guys would like to see?
So I know that work is continuing on that front and everything, and I agree with you. I think working on a lot of the types of things like merchants and kind of the upper layer user facing aspect is kind of important. The part of the thing is, from my perspective, is that I pretty much am, even though I'm pivoting some to working on more of that other stuff, and like the decentralized mixing is one of them. There's some others, but it's still like for me personally, it's still going to mostly be a little bit closer to the network, because like the merchant side, there are people working on that, and I agree with you, it's definitely important. But we still have to maintain the core network, and so there's always going to be a little bit of of my attention that's diverted towards that. And most of the things that I will likely be working on are going to be dealing with, even if they're building on top of it, which is the idea, because that's really, like I said, the decentralized mixing really does build on top of it. And so the same kind of thing for the other things. So even if it's still building on top of it, it will pretty much most likely be closer to the network. So kind of, you can think about, rather than being like super high level, like or like a website or something like that, that isn't most likely where I'd be spending any time. I'd be spending more time on things that are kind of close to the protocol but aren't at the protocol level itself, that kind of build on top of it, but at a lower layer, and things that really kind of enable more things. Because if you take a look at like, for example, I can mention one of the things that I'm planning on looking at even more is increasing the privacy even more, as far as for the default privacy that happens on the network. And so that won't involve changes to consensus or anything like that. So that's not like working on the core network or, per se, but it does involve the actual protocol on top of being able to speak to other nodes and things on top of it. And so hopefully that makes sense of where I'm thinking when I talk about, because I mean, I did, I mentioned that, and it probably wasn't super clear. Like, I wasn't trying to imply that I was going to work on like something that would be like a website or whatever, but more the sense of things that that build on top of the network but aren't the network in and of itself, right?
Yeah, I've always appreciated the fact that you are very, very consistent, with the areas that you focus on. You don't try to kind of come out of that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have such a solid network, is because devs like yourself are just so focused on what they want to do. And it really is now about bringing in maybe even different people. I use the word devs very lightly, but people that can build these kind of websites and things like that. But it's definitely interesting. I love the fact that you're still thinking about improving even more privacy and taking that even further. That's absolutely amazing. What about you, Exitus? Is there anything specific that going forward that you'd like to see?
I would like to see Decred. This isn't in our control really, but seeing Decred on basically every decentralized exchange that comes out. So there's one I'm looking forward to called Sarai. I've talked about it a little. It's basically like Thorchain, but built on Monero. So it's all private. It's being built by the Cake Wallet team. So I would like to see Decred be on that, and really any like innovative platform that comes up. Another thing I would like to see is Decred on BTC Pay Server. So maybe we can get it listed a few places, and it can be accepted as a currency for payment. And I think that's something that's not incredibly difficult to do, because there's a bunch of altcoins that have done it.
Yeah, I know that's the B2C Pay service, something I've looked at. One of the devs did say about how heavy it was now, kind of, maybe it's not the best platform, but like you say, so many people are using it.
Yeah, that's what everyone's using. So it's kind of like, okay, it might not be the best, but that's what a lot of these vendors are using. So yeah.
So it might even be nice to say to one of those guys over at BTC Pay Server, would you put a proposal together to actually kind of put us on there? But yeah, that would be quite cool.
Well, it's open source, so they, if one of our guys does it, I've already reached out to them, and they say they would do the pull request if everything was correct. So
right,
yeah,
oh, that's good. Yeah, cool. The kind of the next bits I had on my list were more Jake specific, but is there anything that you guys want to add to what we've already talked about?
No, I mean, I think I pretty much covered
most
of the things.
You literally just bombarded it, and there's so much great information there. I think, I'm ridiculously excited about Decred 2 and where this goes next. I'm also really excited about DCR Dex and Bison Relay. But if I don't want to. If there's no other questions, I don't want to prolong it just for the sake of prolonging it. So, what do you reckon, Exitus? Anything else there that you want to ask?
Yeah, I'm trying to take a look on some more questions. It's probably just kind of what comes next, and I think that's more up Jake's alley. One question is how to attract more developers to join.
Yeah, so I think one of the hard parts about that is that it's almost kind of like a catch-22 in the sense of most people want to work on things that are already popular. But one of the things that makes them popular, of course, is having a bunch of people working on them. So I think that from that perspective, it is. Um, I guess the I think for the most part, if we're talking about depends on kind of developers in what area. I hear this question somewhat frequently as you're talking about attracting different developers, and so uh, one of the things that I think kind of ends up getting a bit conflated in that is that when we're talking about, say, for like the core network and everything, I don't think we need, as it was just mentioned, it's kind of diminishing returns mostly at this point. So it's like I don't really think we need too many more developers on that front. So what we probably would be nice to have would be developers that are wanting to work on some of the higher level things. And so I think from that perspective, it might just be a case of putting together some proposals and actually kind of having the plan, so to speak, laid out already so that people just kind of join. Because I think one of the kind of intimidating parts, I've talked to a few people that have come and gone, and I think one of the intimidating things is the way we're kind of structured is we're very much kind of self-starters in the sense that we know what needs to get done and we go do it, right? And so depending on the type of developers, if you want to have kind of more broad appeal, I think it probably would make sense to have some kind of I don't want to really say like a roadmap per se, but basically some on ramps so that it kind of like, well, here's some places that you could easily go and work in, but it would have to be at a higher level because, as I mentioned, the only thing really at the lower levels when you really get into it, it's the extremely difficult diminishing returns type of stuff that doesn't really lend itself well to somebody who's never even looked at it, kind of showing up and working on it. You need somebody that's extremely adept or has spent a lot of time understanding how every part of the system works to do some of the stuff that would be left at the very lower levels. But there's ample opportunity at the higher levels, and I think basically kind of just highlighting what types of things that are available and what people could do could help in that regard.
Yeah, one area that we talked about, I mean, maybe well over a year ago now, is building on the Stamply tool and actually making something that can be used for all kinds of legal kind of, what was the word we used? Documenting ownership and things like that. But
Right, for
that might,
timestamping.
yeah. I think the timestamping service is quite underutilized. I think there's so much potential there for someone that might be interested in putting that together. I quite like the idea of actually having something like Bison Relay store the document as well as the timestamp as well. But all down the line, I'm guessing. But yeah, lots of interesting stuff there. Well, Dave, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you kind of diving into all the aspects of the version 2 release. Really looking forward to what comes next and kind of increasing the privacy even further and maybe getting some. Well, the speed is just absolutely ridiculous. Anyways, it's absolutely amazing. Final thoughts, Exitus and Dave. Do you want to sign us off?
Yeah, sure. Basically, DCR Dex version 1 should be out soon. So, and same with Cake Wallet. From what I understand, the Cake Wallet on Decred, Decred on Cake Wallet's coming really soon. So be on the lookout for all those things. Make sure to upgrade to the latest version, Decred version 2. I think it's 2.0.1. Fixes the issues and people were having with mixing. I know it fixed my issues. So definitely upgrade to that. And it was amazing to see that come out so fast to address those issues. But yeah, we a lot to look forward to in Decred. So thanks everyone for joining.
And Dave, final note.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on. To mirror what Exitus was just saying there, definitely if you've already upgraded to 2.0, I highly suggest moving to 2.01, and also keeping an eye out. We're going to be putting out a 2.02 to take care of a couple other little edge cases that we've noticed. We've been monitoring everything pretty closely to see what's happening and making sure that keep everything running smoothly. So there's going to be another release probably next week, but I'll say that for sure, but before too much longer. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.